you've been representing House District 45 in the General Assembly for a while. Can you kind of just, give me your history there? How'd you become a representative there? And
Sure.
just give me your story in House District 45.
Sure. I actually used to be mayor of the city of Jasonville many, many years ago. I'm 62 now. I was first elected into office when I was 28 years old, and then served 8 years as a mayor, and then later on was approached actually by retired Senator John Waterman about running for state representative in District 45 after John Gregg had retired. And to make a long story short, the first time I ran, I lost, but barely, and so ran again the next cycle and ended up winning. And then later on when they did the map redistricting, I lost barely again. Not that this is an excuse, but I would not have lost. But there was some voter fraud that took place in Sullivan County. In fact, there was a fellow that actually went to federal prison over it. And I think I ended up losing by 68 votes and had lost. They're estimating about 1,000 on the absentee fraud. And so, but nonetheless, I ended up losing. And that was after the maps were redrawn, and I had already served a very heavily Democrat district as a Republican, but I got a lot of Democrat votes. And then when I did end up losing, well, then I came back and ran again and ended up winning. So I've actually lost twice, but overall I've served 16 years, which is a combination of 8 two-year terms.
I assume that you're not pleased with Representative Ellington's decision to run in 45. Can you kind of speak
right.
about
I mean,
that?
the bottom line is he does not live there. I mean, he claims that he does. I mean, it's like I've told people. It is just like, I'll give you an example. Well, here's this house that he still owns, and basically you could go over there today and you're going to find the vast majority of his vehicles, of his assets, his businesses. It's over on I believe it's 680 West That Road. It's spelled T-H-A-T here in Bloomington. And then this is where he's claiming to have moved into. It's an old woolen factory there in Bloomfield, Indiana. And what I contend is that the bottom line is he simply owns an address, but that's not his residence. I think that most people would look at this and go, yeah, that's a home. This is an old abandoned factory building, and there don't seem to be any signs of life over there. But from what I was told by another fellow state rep, that Jeff had talked to him, and he was terribly afraid of when the new maps were drawn. He at one time had lost to Peggy Welch. She was a Democrat state representative. Well, she ended up beating him, and with the new district, she would be in that district, and he was scared to run against her. And then another state rep that actually shares an office space with him had told me that Jeff was worried about, he felt like he could win this year if he remained in District 62, but he would have trouble during presidential years because there's a heavier Democrat turnout in Monroe County, even though, the city of Bloomington had been carved out. So ultimately the bottom line was that he was looking for an area where it would be easier for him to run, and so that's why he and his wife had purchased this old factory building 4 years ago, and they claimed that they would have already made it their home except for COVID. Well, we rehab a lot of properties, a lot, and COVID hasn't stopped us one day. If there's one group of people that don't, that have said, hey, I'm not letting that slow us down, it's basically carpenters and construction workers, plumbers, electricians, so forth. And so the bottom line is we felt like he was desperately looking for a way that he didn't have to run in District 62, and particularly in light of the fact that he was fearful of running against Peggy Welch, and then he was also worried about a heavier Democrat turnout during presidential years.
So how has the race been so far? Have you been speaking with him? Has it been cordial? How is that?
No, it's not been cordial at all. In fact, they hired when I say they, he and his wife had hired, from what I was told by a mutual friend, they hired a consultant out of Washington, D.C., and then we know from their mailers that there's an outfit out of San Antonio, Texas, doing all of his mailings, and it's been just nasty. It's been the most bitter, nasty mailers that I've ever experienced in my life. And you can tell that They basically have one goal, and that's to win at all costs. Truth, they could care less about the truth, and so the bottom line is that they must win, and if they have to destroy me in the process, that's what they're going to do.
So how does that compare to your campaign? Are you contracting out with people like that, or is it a one-man show?
No, I mean it's pretty.
Are you win at all costs?
A one-man show, and it's not win at all costs. But I will tell you, we're having to go back on the attack. I don't prefer that. I would rather prefer to be able to share my ideas for the state of Indiana and District 45, and I'd love to have a debate with him over that. I would absolutely love to, but. The bottom line is that, and that's the reality of it, is that whenever you're just being busted, I used to box years ago, and if a guy's, busting you in the chops, sometimes you can't just play defense all the time. So we're going on offense, and one of the ways we're doing that, for example, is we're showing people and saying, this is not a home. We know this is not a home. This is simply an address, and it's like I tell people. If I go, if I own a rental property in Lewis, Indiana, all right, sometimes, before we rented it out, we were working on it. So there was electric on, there was water on, and so forth. But just because I would change my driver's license over to that residence and my voter ID, that doesn't mean that was my home or my primary residence. And so I feel like what they're doing is basically trying to fool the voters of District 45. And I think he was just simply, carpetbagging, looking for friendlier political turf than what he might have experienced in District 62.
So you said you'd like to talk about yourself and kind of what you're offering. Can what makes you the right guy for District 45? Maybe not so much as what Representative
Sure.
Ellington has done, but what makes you the right guy for 45?
Well, for one thing, I do tell people the truth. I mean, I absolutely do, and I'm going to segue back onto something as well. It's just like, he had signed a no tax pledge, that he would not increase would not increase taxes. Well, he voted for the gas tax, and then he also voted, and not only did he vote for it, but what he voted for was a bill that put it on autopilot, and so every year that tax increases with inflation. And so it didn't just increase that year, it goes up. In fact, he doesn't want to talk about that issue at all. And I did vote against that bill because I didn't like the fact that basically the taxes, number one, he violated his tax pledge, but I don't like taxes going on autopilot. If we're going to increase taxes, we should be accountable to the voters for that, and the other thing is he also increased registration fees. And what we found out in doing research on just what we call opposition research, quite frankly, is we found that he has two vehicles, he's got a lot of vehicles, but two of his primary vehicles that he drives around in, one is a Mercedes-Benz and one is a Lexus. They're both very nice luxury vehicles, and that's okay. I have no qualms about that. I mean, bless him for having nice vehicles. But what he was doing, he was on the Mercedes-Benz, he was taking plates off of a 1977 vehicle and putting on the back of his Mercedes-Benz, and then he was taking plates off of a 1972 Olds Cutlass and putting those on his Lexus. And so he basically, well, not basically, what he did is he voted to raise your taxes, my taxes, and then to raise everybody's registration fees, and he was cheating. I mean, he was putting on state representative plates on those vehicles, and he had never registered in the state of Indiana. He had never titled them over to his name, yet he was driving around just figuring with the number 30 plate on the Mercedes-Benz, he was not likely to be pulled over because he's a state rep, and they do show us some latitude. The police do. I mean, not that they should, but generally speaking, they do. And so he was taking a strong chance there, or if he'd had an accident or whatever. And then on the Lexus, he had the number 130 plate. Well, just as proof of that, recently what he's done is he's canceled the number 30 plate and the number 130, and I believe that Mercedes-Benz is now getting 230, and the Lexus is getting 530. And so, finally, the Mercedes-Benz, even after we disclosed this publicly in a meeting on February the 18th, it was an elections commission hearing on his residency. Even after that was disclosed, he still continued to drive that Mercedes-Benz on the illegal license plates without registering his vehicle. We were shocked. I mean, A friend of mine that does research on this stuff pulled it up from the BMV, which anybody can buy those records. And anyhow, we found out that he still didn't register didn't register that vehicle, the Mercedes-Benz, until April the 12th. So he went almost another 2 months, basically just thumbing his nose at the law and saying, well, I know I make law, but the law doesn't apply to me. I'm going to raise your taxes, but I'm not going to pay mine, and I'm going to cheat you people. And that's the bottom line. That's what he was doing.
So what would you say what do you feel your biggest accomplishment from your time in the General Assembly? What can you point to? What are you proud of stuff?
Well, I mean, one of the big things I was proud of is that the first year that I was in, they had and I can't think of the accounting term for it, but basically a structural deficit. It's basically, there was a deficit where if you, it would be like, let's say, for example, you're sitting down and you're working out your budget, and you set aside your car payment, you set aside your insurance payment, you set aside your rent payment, and go, gee, Liz, look at all the money that I've got. Well, that's kind of what the state of Indiana was doing. We were running structural deficits. And the first year that I came into office, and it wasn't just me. I don't want to. I know Jeff's fond of saying, "Well, I forced them to do this, forced them to do that." No, many of my colleagues, were participants in this as well. But the bottom line is, we were able to offset and to pay back a lot of those deficits. We also started restoring the teachers' retirement pension, or the pension retirement fund. It was billions of dollars in the hole, and we're still not caught up where it needs to be, but we did start restoring it. We've been able to lower taxes. I was co-author on the bill this year that reduced taxes from, I think, 3.23% down to 2.9% over a period of time. And again, I can't take credit for that. There's a doctor named Tim Brown. He was the head over Ways and Means. That was Tim's bill. I was a co-author on it, but there were many that were co-authors. And Jeff's always saying, I forced them to do this, I forced them to do that. That's simply not true. Again, the bottom line is the people of Indiana are the ones that deserve the credit, because it's their money that we're putting to work, but we're giving some of that money back, and I'm glad to be able to do that. But the real man that deserves the credit for that is Dr. Tim Brown. Again, I co-authored the bill, as did many others, and he was kind enough to put us on there. But for me to take credit for all that stuff is wrong, and it would be ungodly. So I'm just glad to be part of a team that was able to do that. And as a former mayor, I hated debt and I hated taxes. And I know when I came in as mayor of the city of Jasonville, we were, I think, close to $4 million in the hole, which was a lot of money back then. Keep in mind, I'm 62 now, I was 28 back then, so it was a lot more money then than it is today. But with the Lord's help, we were able to basically pay back those debts 27 years early. And so I've always been a strong fiscal conservative. I'm a very strong social conservative. I'm very, very much pro-life, and it's based on my faith and my love of Jesus Christ, quite frankly, and the fact that I was born and my mother gave me life, and I want other babies to have that opportunity. I was endorsed by the NRA. I think I tell people that not endorsed. We were both A-rated, so it wasn't that I was not endorsed. We were both A-rated, but the bottom line is, I always tell people that your right to bear arms isn't just so you can go squirrel hunting. It's so you don't become the squirrel that's hunted. And so, no question, I'm fiscally conservative, socially conservative, and I'm just really great to be part of a team that has gotten Indiana back on solid footing financially, quite frankly.
So what is the biggest issue facing your District 45? What's the biggest issue facing the district right now?
Well, there are two big issues, and I'm going to kind of tune you into there's I think if you go into YouTube, you can watch it. It's called Demographic Winter, and then you can watch Demographic Bomb. And you guys seem like very bright fellas, here at the university. And I went to IU years ago, but having said that, one of the problems that we're having is we're literally having children born at lower than the birth rate. And so, and that's driving a lot of these problems as far as getting employees. And I tell people that, you know, one of the biggest issues we've got is we had the baby boomers. I'm part of the baby boom generation, or baby boomer generation. And now we've got all these people retiring, and we just don't have enough young people coming into the workforce to meet the needs of that. And so we really, truly do have to start having larger families, because if you think the problems are tough now, they're going to be catastrophic in the future. Just, you know, I mean, everywhere you go, people are trying to hire. Well, everybody thinks it's because the economy is so good. Well, the economy is, it's okay, but the bigger issue is that there just aren't enough young people to go in and fill those tasks following in the baby boomers. And so that's going to be an issue. And another issue in my district in particular, in District 45, now Jeff is, you know, he's in District 62, so he doesn't have quite that same issue, even though he wears badges all the time that says State Rep District 45. It's a lie, but it doesn't stop him from wearing the badge. But anyhow, the coal mines. And one of the bills that we had this year was trying to deal with a lot of the banks from out east that are trying to make it very difficult for the coal mines to actually borrow money. You know, and so, you know, they're trying to go to green energy, and the fact of it is, it's just like these cameras, these lights, depending on who's, you know, I realize you can always get a different survey from whoever you want to read, but on some surveys I've read, the state of Indiana gets about 82 to 83% of its electricity from coal. And so we can't be shutting down our mines and expect for people to be able to pay their electric bills, to pay their heat bills and so forth. And so we've got to protect the coal mines and be able to allow them to get access to loans, just to buy new equipment, to upgrade old equipment. I talked to a head of one of the mines down in my district, and she works with the accounting portion of it, and she said we used to have about 44 banks that we could get money from, and she said now we're down to like 4. And she said even though we're profitable, even though we have good business practices, she said that drives up our interest rates. It makes it hard to buy new, what they call perpetual miners that are down below the ground to do the mining, and it's a machine that just, you know, goes in and digs out the coal. I've been down there in those spots, and so we've got to protect our coal industry, and so again, I think two of the biggest issues we're facing are just simply a lack of young people to fill the workforce, and then also to make sure that the coal industry is protected, because, you know, heaven help us if we do lose it, because people are struggling right now. They're literally struggling just to get to work because of gas prices, and if electric prices go up, and natural gas is also under attack as well, we can't go down this road and expect for our children and our grandchildren to have good lives at all.
So earlier you said, you know, you joined a pretty heavy Democrat district, I think you said at the beginning. Can you give me maybe an example or two of a time where you maybe reached across the aisle, you worked with Democrats on an idea, an issue that maybe they felt passionate about, some of your ability to maybe reach across the aisle and work with those who don't?
Absolutely. You know, for example, it's just like, you know, we have the goose ponds down by in my district, and the bottom line is that's, you know, it's where, I mean, that's the name, the goose ponds, but we're seeing a lot of eagles and so forth in there, and you know, I've got some friends that are very strong on environmental issues, which I am as well, and I think it's unfortunate that as a Republican Party that we frequently, you know, it's like, you know, if we dare to protect nature for the future of our children, that somehow, you know, we're labeled a tree hugger, or that's ridiculous and so forth. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, our children have a heritage. I mean, we all love to visit state parks and national parks or county parks and so forth. And so I've reached across the aisle a lot with a lot of my colleagues in the Democrat Party on protecting the environment for the future of our children.
So I guess kind of getting into, you know, you spoke to some of your beliefs in this past session and kind of what you're running on.
Sure.
Taking a look at the session, I believe I have it correct that you voted in favor of the education issues bill that was kind of a hot topic, 1134.
Yeah.
I guess kind of, do you see issues with the current education here in the state right now?
Well, the bottom line on that bill, I mean, really the bottom line was that we wanted parental involvement, and you know, the Indiana State Teachers Association did a great job of, working up the teachers and keeping them upset and nervous about it. But it really wasn't, it wasn't saying that, parents had to approve every lesson plan and so forth. But parents did at least have, they had a seat at the table. And we wanted that. And what I found is that as I actually explained the bill to parents, they were like, to parents and to teachers, actually specifically more to teachers than to parents, they were like, this isn't bad at all. I mean, a lot of them are already, doing their lesson plans ahead of time anyhow, putting them up on a school, I forget what, basically their education, management tool. And so, that was not an attack on education in any way, shape, or form. It was just to make sure that parents had a seat at the table.
Okay, and another bill that was kind of hotly contested this past session was 1041, the trans athletes in school bill. I saw
Sure.
Speaker Houston came out and said almost right after that, he was planning on overriding that veto.
Sure.
Would it be safe to assume that you would also vote to override that veto?
Absolutely, yeah.
And so why is this such a hot topic issue with maybe the GOP here in Indiana?
Well,
right now?
and it shouldn't be with just the GOP. I mean, there's no question that God made us male and female. I always like to tell people, there's a book by this title called All Truth is God's Truth, whether it be mathematical, scientific, so forth. And, and basically the bottom line is that there is a major, physiological difference, and it really isn't fair to girls who are competing against males who are, I don't care what they claim to be going through, that, a male is never going to be a female or vice versa. I mean, their DNA is different, their muscular mass is different, their bone structure is different. And so, I mean, if you look at the swimmer, for example, in Pennsylvania that's shattering the women's records, that is not a female swimmer doing that. That's a male swimmer who is, doing some hormone injections and things like that, but it's still not fair to female athletes. And so that's why I voted for that bill and will continue to. And I think we're going down a very, just a very slippery slope. And I think that's an evil path that we're taking society down. And to teach children that this is normal is wrong, and it's ungodly and it's unscientific as well.
So it sounds like, you're a fan of Speaker Houston there. He said they want to, or you all want to override that veto. Do you ever feel that maybe you could get more effective conservative legislation done, and does Speaker Houston ever kind of pull you guys back from that at all, or are you satisfied with his House leadership?
Well, no, actually, I'm satisfied with his House leadership, but I definitely probably am strongly to the right of where he's at. I mean, but I realize he also has, he's got a wider mix of people that he has to please than myself, so, but I tend to be pretty far right on, quite frankly, on social issues. For example, I felt like the mask mandates lasted way too long. I felt like, one of the things that bothered me is that some of the medicines that we knew that would cure COVID, that would take care of it, were, doctors were not being allowed to prescribe them and so forth. And so I feel like hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, and in fact, I've got a number of friends that literally, they were going to rural farm supply stores and getting ivermectin and measuring it out instead of, they call it horse paste, but it's not a paste. I mean, but that's the name. And they were calculating out the dosage they should have, and they were getting over COVID in just a matter of, one was like in 8 hours for both he and his wife. And so for whatever strange reason, a lot of things that we knew that could have worked were being denied to people medically. And so I would not have, my goal was to stop that stuff much sooner than what it stopped.
And then just a couple more here, and you kind of touched on this before, abortion. With the changes that we've seen to the U.S. Supreme Court, there has been more discussion about maybe the future of Roe v. Wade. Right. Maybe it'll get overturned, maybe kind of knocked down a little bit. If that happens, again, would it be safe to assume you'd be in favor of maybe some more state-level restrictions on abortion access?
Yes.
Maybe a special session? Can you give me your thoughts on abortion here in the future?
Yeah, it's it's an old saying. I think Ronald Reagan may have said it initially, but I'm not sure who to give the credit for. But I've noticed that everybody who is for abortion has already been born, and I would agree with that. The bottom line is that it is the death of a child, we are killing a child. And so my goal is to vote, to do everything we can to protect the life of the most innocent amongst us, and that would be the unborn baby.
Kind of staying national, we kind of discussed elections. I mean, would you say is Joe Biden the rightfully elected president right now?
No, I honestly don't believe that
Okay.
he is. I truly don't.
Yeah, maybe can you expand upon that? Was it, you
Yeah,
talked
I
about
mean,
voter fraud a little bit earlier.
if you look at, for some, for example, some of the things that happened, just like I believe it was the State Farm arena down in Atlanta, Georgia, where they had the, claim that the water lines had broken and they had to empty it out, and then they actually had footage on the security cameras of all these boxes being brought in and so forth, and then they found out it was just a toilet that was overflowing or something like that. I mean, there are many instances on that, and so no, I don't believe that it was legitimate. I really don't.
Okay. My final question here, I kind of asked this before, but what makes you the right guy for the job? Why should House District 45 voters, why should they vote for you?
Basically, I really do look at people and have empathy for them and their situations. I'm not going to pass laws and go, well, this law applies to you, but not to me. And so just, as I mentioned, my opponent, he passed, gas tax increases, increases on paying registration fees, and then cheated on his own. I mean, he did, and he even continued doing it for months after he was caught, and I really do, at the end of my life, it's like I tell people, I answer to an audience of one, and I want to hear, well done, thou good and faithful servant, not, boy, you sure fooled them, and I do believe that, I do believe in God, but I believe even more strong, I mean, let me rephrase that. I believe in God, but I also believe in His Son, Jesus Christ. A lot of times people they talk about God like He's just this vague concept, but I do believe in Jesus Christ as well. He is my Savior and He's my Lord, and the bottom line is, whether I'm a state representative or not is a small thing as to whether or not I've lived a life that's pleasing to Him.